I'm just going to jump right into something that I wrote. So I was really depressed. Not recently. This is about a year ago. Big time depressed. Up to that point, I thought my rock bottom had existed in the past, but as it turned out, there was more room below the rocks that I had prior hit. This is not said in search of pity. This is not said so I can wave my hand and jump for attention, look over here, look at my suffering. No, playing the who has suffered more game is entirely unnecessary. We all suffer. Objectively, some of us suffer more than others, and we suffer in different ways, but we do all suffer. I share my own suffering because one, I got through that rock bottom. I got through that season, and I seek to initiate hope that you too will get through your difficult seasons. And two, I share my pits of hell and how despite goodness was formed from it to display God's mode of operation. Display what people actually mean when they drop the phrase, well, God is always working. I know this is flowery language. I know we do not always want to hear, well, God is always working. The phrase hardly absolves the problem at hand. And I know the word of God is tied to many preconceptions, false ideas, and even traumas for many of us. With this in mind, I must first be a bother and divert from the story that I want to share to make a case. This case is for those who, for very good reason, recoil at the word God. Let me presuppose my own story by suggesting what the word means and what God even is. And I know that there are many who believe that God cannot be defined, but I do not believe that it or he is so unambiguous, that he is so ambiguous that it can't be defined. Because if that were the case, then how could somebody pursue God at all if you can't define or talk of what it is and what he is and what his essence is in some way? So I am going to make a case for a bit of a definition. I might be so bold. So again, this case is for those who, for very, very good reason, recoil at the word God. The recoiling, I suspect, is a result of equating the word God with a bad experience. A church or someone supposed to be upholding the word of God, youth camp, something connected to the word God, faith, or religion might have inflicted harm. And sincerely, I am very sorry. That was no doubt a bad experience, and no doubt you carry trauma forward from that if you carry trauma forward from that. While possibly an abandoning thought, I must say that the harm was not God's doing. It was the result of some opposing force, if you will. This opposing force being pride always, and also possibly wrapped up in greed, gluttony, lust, wrath, or sloth. All of which are things that do not define God's characteristics. God both is and is the author of goodness, beauty, and truth. It is the conductance of true virtue which points to God. These virtues being humility, charity, chastity, kindness, temperance, patience, and diligence. Someone inflicting harm or an institution inflicting harm is not adhering to these virtues. They're not exemplifying God's characteristics, even if there's a cross around the neck or a Bible in their hand. So anytime something bad happens, it is not of God's doing, because that is not God's nature. That is not his essence. That is not what defines him. Or if this helps get rid of the false pretense that, God's an angry man floating up in the sky, which he's not. God is a spirit. God is a power. God is a thing. It is hard to define, but he certainly is not the things in the world that are caused by pride, greed, gluttony, lust, wrath, or sloth, because that's not what defines God. Surely there are better examples out there, but as I was writing this, I was sipping coffee, so here is what I can offer. Saying that God inflicted harm is like saying the consumption of coffee made you tired. That is not the biological mechanism of coffee. That is not in its nature. If you're experiencing exhaustion, you are no doubt experiencing exhaustion. However, it is not because of coffee. There's another internal biological mechanism, another force, if you will, at play simultaneous to the coffee rushing through your system. This simultaneous force might be the failure to sleep last night is finally catching up with you, and you have more adenosine in your system than you do caffeine. Or adenosine is binding to the receptors more than the caffeine is. Or maybe the temperature in the room is cooling your body temperature enough to initiate drowsiness. So you certainly are tired, but it's not the coffee that's causing it. It's a different force. So if something bad happened, it is not at God's hand, because God is characterized, God is defined by what is purely good, true, and beautiful. And I say that this is an abandoning thought because you might think, well, amidst my pain, where was God then? It almost is more of a consolation to believe that God inflicted the harm, because then you think, well, at least God's paying attention to me. At least he focuses on me. It's almost like you'd rather be hated by somebody than to have somebody feel indifferent towards you. It's almost like you rather had God smack you over the head than be not there amidst your pain at all. So you might think again, where was God amidst my pain? To which I would very unhelpfully probably reply, well, God is always working. And to which I will share a more dilute suffering story to hopefully, more helpfully, show what I mean when I say God is always working. So as I proceed with this story, if it may resonate more, substitute the word God with goodness and or truth, and maybe your idea of God will shift. Because goodness and truth is amidst suffering. We just might not see it, or we might not see it until the aftermath. Now that I have made my case, I will proceed with my story. A year and a half prior to the rock bottom that I opened the podcast with, I was flying from the West Coast back to my hometown on the East Coast to live there for the foreseeable future and leave it to the confined, inescapable headquarters of an airplane for me to achieve a meditative state in which I am now fantasizing about what this next season of life would bring. Genuinely, flying on an airplane is like a retreat for me. It's confined, it's cozy, you can't go anywhere. Maybe not cozy, but you can't go anywhere, so I just go inward and meditate and pray. So, excuse my imagination, but I was dreaming of brunches, tea parties, colorful outfits, fruitful conversations with women who surely I, Teresa, was going to bring together for the sake of encouragement and uplifting. I know this sounds like I'm a Connecticut debutante, but after spending a year across the country with no friends, family, or community, I could not help but fantasize about a community, about feeling important, and about making others feel important too. And the clinking of teacup on a tea plate sounded really nice amidst all of that as well. But, as all fantasies possess, mine too had a lot of holes. I imagined myself and tried to convince myself that I was going to muster up the courage and white-knuckle my way into drawing together a group of people. But the hole in the fantasy was my pride, which I could not unetch from my soul. And of course, I still struggle to unetch from my soul. And my pride manifests itself in living a life, or I should say, therefore, lacking to live a life, because the foundation to my living and actions is often a fear of what other people think of me. I completely lacked social courage at that point, and I lacked a proneness to socialization altogether, but yet there I was, flying through the clouds of my own cognitive dissonance, deluding myself of the capabilities I possess, trying to convince myself that yes, I, Teresa Fitzgibbon, was going to bring a community of people together. I think this was just a defense mechanism as a way to console my heart's ache to belong to a community of people after spending so much time alone. But I should say my fantasies were not all based on pretense. I was riding home from an adventure on the West Coast in which I was courageous. I did for many times get out of my comfort zone. I was obedient to God's request, imperfectly, but pretty sustainably for about a year. So I had some ground to stand on as I was trying to convince myself that I could do this. Being alone, being on the West Coast alone for about a year, made it pretty impossible not to hear God's request. And the more I heard it and the more it poked at me, the more it became a nuisance to ignore it, which is why during my previous adventure on the West Coast, I was more obedient to God. And I want to go on a bit of a side quest, a bit of a spiritual direction side quest. No, I'm not a spiritual director, so take this as you will. But by God's request, no, not audible voices. For me, God's requests are often those quiet thoughts that will pop up on few to several occasions. God's requests are made known through what I like to call a feelings salad, a salad of intuition, instinct, knowingness planted in my mind, and a yes, I should do this planted in my gut. God's requests are never temptations. They tend to quietly unsettle me if they're not pursued. I tend to actually sin. I tend to do what is wrong in their stead. If I'm not pursuing God, I tend to be pursuing the wrong thing. So it leaves me unsettled and oftentimes spiraling downward, which is how I eventually got to my rock bottom. They require anywhere from a bit to a great deal of work. They're always in accordance with what is moral. They're never temptations, and they always orient towards what is good and beautiful, and they might orient others toward what is good and beautiful. As they say, they build up the kingdom. We don't really say that in the Northeast, but they build up the kingdom. I digress from that mini spiritual direction and return to my flight home, in which I was sifting through this internal conflict. I want to bring a community of people together. Typically, I lack the social courage to do so, yet of late, I've been pretty courageous. I've been listening to God, so maybe this is possible. I left the internal argument there. I put the dream, the fantasy in my back pocket. I arrived home, and upon arriving home, I went on a mini adventure. During this mini adventure, there were times where I was obedient to God's request. There were other times where I completely failed to do so, and I unraveled into that rock bottom. But all of the yeses, all of the tiny yeses, amidst the worst of me, all culminated into not tea parties yet, but a small community of women. And I want to go through the small God moments, and I want to show how they were all brought together and culminated into this community to show what it is that I mean and what it is that people mean when they say it was the work of God. Because it wasn't the work of Teresa. I didn't pull out a clipboard and say, here are the 12 steps as to how Teresa Fitzgibbon is going to bring together a group of people. I tucked the dream in my pocket. I got home and I just started saying yes to God. From really small things to sometimes what felt like really big things. And because I didn't have to whip out the clipboard and white knuckle my way into bringing people together, that's how it felt like it wasn't my work. Because it wasn't. I really couldn't have planned everything that happened. I just said yes when a request was sitting before me. So, let's go through the God moments. God moment number 1. I returned to my home parish and I started volunteering there. When I arrived home in thought and in prayer, I kept thinking I should return to my old parish to ask if they need any help. I kept putting this off, I didn't put it off for too long. I just thought, that seems too easy. God doesn't ask me to do easy things. He asks us to get out of our comfort zone. I was an altar server. I was in the youth choir. I was a sacristan there. It's pretty comfy cozy for me to go to a place where I have spent so much time. But it kept coming up. So I reached out to the pastor there. And when I met with him, this is likely slightly verbatim, he said, "Well, Teresa, I got to tell you, you couldn't have come at a more perfect time." And I was like, phew. When they say perfect time, when somebody says perfect timing, that was the consolation of, oh yes, God really asked me to be here and I'm glad I am. And this taught me that God doesn't always require us to absolutely leap miles out of our comfort zone. He might just ask us to say yes right on the line of our comfort zone. And the more that I've said yes to the small things, the more it has transformed me so that by the time I have to say yes to bigger things or what would have seemed like a big jump out of my comfort zone doesn't feel like a big jump out of my comfort zone because all the small yeses transformed me into a place where I feel more confident, comfortable, and I have more faith in saying yes to a bigger thing. So, God does not always make big requests. Sometimes it's a small thing, or as Jordan Peterson would say, what's the one thing that you would do that you could do? So, I became a volunteer youth minister at my church, and this, of course, will come up later in the story. God moment number 2. I was scrolling on Instagram one day, and I came across a post by a girl who I have known for nearly my entire life, or I should say I knew of her. I did not speak with her. I went to elementary, middle, and high school with her. I'm pretty sure we were on the same track team at one point, but we just never interacted. But I came across this post on Instagram and I very boldly thought, I'm going to become friends with that girl. And this is bold of me and very strange for me to think and say with such conviction because, again, lacking social courage at this point. I couldn't maintain one friend. I couldn't make new friends, let alone say I'm going to become friends with this girl that I've known my entire life somehow. Let's call this woman Adriana because she'll come up later in the story. Rock bottom. So this is not a God moment. Up to this point, I was putting all of my energy, every ounce of confidence I had into finding a new job, which, funny enough, I got by another God moment, but that's not for this story. And once I got this new job, I completely leaned into rigidity. I was studying. I was using the high that I get from not eating and studying to not eat for purposes of vanity. And this absolutely slingshot me in the other direction. Binging, self-loathing, spiraling downward, isolating myself even more than I typically do. I was absolutely miserable at my job. I was so self-conscious. I could not get out of my head for about 8 hours. I fixated and perseverated on everything that I said to anybody. I felt like I was walking in the halls of high school for 8 hours a day because I work in a pretty open space. And I was just in my head all of the time, spiraling downward. Why did you say that? Why can't you just focus on your work? Just constantly thinking about the way that I looked. But during this time, I managed to say yes, or God gave me the grace, honestly, to say yes twice, which leads me to 2 other God moments. But before doing that, I want to talk about the rock bottom a little bit. I was spiraling downward. I slingshotted in the other direction from rigidity, gluttony, binge eating, and not answering God's request, not pursuing this, which is something that I get a lot of joy out of and fulfillment out of, and spirals me upward. And I was in a very dark place, going down a YouTube rabbit hole. Luckily, my YouTube rabbit holes tend to involve, actually they always involve inspiring things. I might watch America's Got Talent for hours. I might listen to actors' interviews for hours at a time. Think what you want of actors, but it's inspiring for people to put themselves out there, to go to auditions, humiliate themselves, be told no, and to still do it anyway. I get inspiration from that. And at this one point, I was going down America's Got Talent rabbit hole, and I came across the Recklaws, who sing a song, something like, I want to know everything you don't say out loud. I want to know all the things that people don't talk about. And it's a song that was inspired by their mother, who was doing great mentally. She struggled with mental health issues, but she was doing good, I believe the story goes. And a flip kind of switched, and she did end up taking her own life. And that was really scary to me, because I thought, I understand the slippery slope of self-loathing and of having negative self-talk. It is a slippery slope. In the beginning, there was the word. So if you speak good words, that tends to manifest in your life. That tends to be seen. And if you have bad thoughts towards yourself, that also tends to be how we orient ourselves and how we live out our lives. And I understood that slippery slope, and it really scared me, because I was in the negative framework. And that really I took seriously and started to change the way that I was thinking. Now to God moment number 3. Now this is amidst my misery, and this is amidst my depression, I would say. I was really miserable. I hated looking at people. I really did not want them to stare back at me. I thought I looked puffy and disgusting, but I managed to listen to God. I had this conviction that I really needed to have coffee with a friend of mine who I had met as a volunteer youth minister at my parish. And we got together, we had coffee, we shared our love of books, to which she said, hey, we should start a book club. In my head, internally, I'm thinking, not going to happen. Probably just one of those things that people throw out there and say they're going to do, but never going to do it. I'm not going to pursue it because I'm not in the best state of mind. I don't think I'm capable of that. But to cover up those doubts, I raised my voice up a couple octaves and I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. Moved on. God moment number 4. I left work, miserable, self-conscious, for 8 hours, still feeling the remnants of that self-consciousness, can't stop thinking about myself, can't get out of my own head, walked into Target. Coming straight towards me is a friend of mine who I had known for years, and I had not seen her in a really long time. And me, Teresa, at that moment, thought, let's just turn, pretend we don't see her. I can't talk to people. I'm depressed. I don't want her to look at me. I'm disgusting. My body's changed. I don't want her to see it. But in that moment, my mind, by the grace of God, I swear, reoriented towards all the truth and all the confidence that I had gained when living on the West Coast. All of that knowledge, truth, and goodness that I learned and that I acted in accordance with planted in my mind in a second, and it just said, Teresa, she doesn't care what your body looks like. Maybe she does, but it doesn't matter. She's a really nice girl, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. So just plant your feet right there. And I did. And I didn't look away. I didn't turn away. I just stayed right there. I looked right at her. My gosh, she's as lovely as I remember her to be. She came right up to me. She gave me a hug. We reconnected, and then we made a plan to meet up again. We met up again twice. I then asked her to be on my podcast. She said yes. I was undisciplined and a little rat, and I never put it up. Maybe I can find the audio and put it up there. But at the end of that interview with her, she said, you know who you should interview? Adriana, the girl that I saw as I was scrolling on Instagram one day and said, I'm going to be friends with that girl. She said, you should interview her. I didn't bring her up. She brought her up. So that leads to God moment number 5. I connected with Adriana. I also interviewed her. I'm also an undisciplined rat, so hopefully I can get at least the audio out of that interview. But we met, and at the end of that interview, she said, you know what, you should come to Bible study with me. And I was like, wow, the butterfly effect, if you will. But all of these little yeses were culminating into my life, kind of opening up a little bit more. And so I did go to Bible study with her, which leads me to God moment number 6. I did not want to go one day. I work a desk job. Going to Bible study means sitting in the car for about a half hour to get there, then sitting at Bible study for about an hour, and then sitting in the car a half hour to get home. I have ants in my pants at that point, but I just knew you need to go. So it is dark and freezing, but I went for a walk, and then I hopped in the car and I went with her, Adriana, and she had brought 2 of her other friends. And in the car, I was speaking with these 2 girls, and they shared 2 projects that they were working on. For whatever reason, I just knew I needed to be there that night, and I knew that I needed to meet these girls. Now, fast forward. Let me go back and recalibrate the timeline here. I'm on the airplane, and I imagine tea parties with ladies. I get off the plane. I go to my old parish. I have the thought, I'm going to become friends with Adriana. I work, and I spiral downward. I then have coffee with the girl, we'll call her Chelsea, who says we should start a book club. I then meet an old friend in Target who introduces me to Adriana, who then brings me to Bible study and introduces me to these 2 girls. Now I am in my garage, probably working out, listening to the Abiding Together podcast, and they end the podcast with a book. And they say, oh yeah, or you can start a book club and you guys can read the book together. To which God very softly, I very kindly had the thought, Teresa, you should start a book club. All of those yeses transformed me to a place where I gained, I don't want to say the social courage, but yes, a little bit. But not only did God transform the social courage, to which I no longer fear quite as much, I still do, but not quite as much what other people think of me. But God gave me all of the tools I needed to start a book club throughout all of those small yeses throughout the 2 years. I didn't have to pull out the clipboard. I didn't have to say, what should I do next? In that moment, it all culminated. Where was I going to have the book club? Well, I was going to have it at my old parish because I'm now friends with, they had since hired a youth minister. I'm friends with her now, and she can advertise the book club to whomever wants to join. Great. And we'll have it at the parish. Got the location. I've got some help from the youth minister. She's going to invite some of her friends and advertise. I know a couple people who I'm going to invite. Who am I going to invite? Well, I'm going to invite Adriana, of course. And she's going to invite a couple other people from Bible study. All in an instant, a group of women formed. And I did not bring them together. It was the work of God. It all just came together in that instant. So at the time that I was sitting down with Chelsea and she said we should have a book club, that felt like a punch to the stomach. And I was like, absolutely not. That's way too far out of my comfort zone. I can't do it. I'm depressed right now. But by the time that I heard on the Abiding Together podcast something about a book club, I was in a place of peace. So the request from God felt like peace. And in Colleen Carroll Campbell's book, The Heart of Perfection, which we read in one of our book clubs, she talks about true requests from God feeling like a raindrop just being infused into your mind. And that's what this felt like. And it felt like a true request from God because, one, it was so peaceful. It was just like, oh yeah, I can do that. And two, all of the answers as to how I was going to do it came to me from all of the things I'd been doing. Those became my resources for this. And in one of our book clubs, the two girls whose projects I had learned while in the car to book club, this is about a year later at this point. These two girls joined for one of the book clubs, and the chapter of the book just so happened to be so relatable to those two projects that they were working on and struggling through. I can't share it because it's not my story to share, but just sitting there and thinking how amazing this whole timeline is. That's when they say God's timing is perfect. And how the God moments continue to persist as women who have moved to the region find out about the podcast and tell me, oh my God, I've been looking for a community to get started with. And I'm just blown away to think how many God moments have come just from this book club. And we haven't had our tea parties yet. And I don't wear white gloves. But maybe one day I'll show up to book club in a little debutante outfit. But I barely had to lift a finger to create the community of women. It wasn't I, Teresa. It was doing the one thing that I would do, that I could do for a couple of years. And then God did the heavy lifting and it all came together. That's God's mode of operation. He transforms and prepares. He doesn't pull a whip out and say, do this now and you better be ready. It's that image of the heart of Christ that's on fire, the Sacred Heart. God is all about transforming you into what it is that you could be. And again, it's not like a 12-step process. And it's so good. It's so good where, of course, we don't have to leap over the mountain. If you try and leap over the mountain, you're not going to get enough velocity, whatever that curve thing is. You're not going to get enough of that. You're going to hit the top of the summit and you're going to fall backward. Of course, it's walking up a mountain. It's the walking. It's just, I always thought I had to jump over the mountain. And I was like, that's too scary. I don't want to jump over it. I'm going to get hurt. I'm going to scrape the summit while trying to get over the top. So if you are in a bad place in life or in a difficult scenario, what is a small yes? Focus on what is right in front of you. And I know we all know this, but you can't get 12 steps ahead because it is physically impossible to be there. And if you are so depressed that you literally can't pick yourself up off of your bed, which I understand, maybe it's just lifting a finger. Genuinely, maybe the next step is just lifting a finger and saying, God, please help me. Okay, that's all I got. Maybe the next step is, I need a nap. Like sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes God's like, no, I'm just calling you to a nap right now or a meal. It might not be anything big or crazy, but just focus on saying yes to the thing you have to say yes to that's right in front of you. And God will do what he does. He'll do his MO. Okay.